Hello, Mr. Aaron Barlow, who is running for the State Senate, District 21. I'm Trenton Adams. Welcome to Cherokee County Republican Party candidate interviews. Thank you for taking the time out of your campaign to participate in this interview process. We've extended this invitation to all candidates in this race and sourced questions from the CCRP membership. We have found that it has been an asset for voters in making their decision. The video will appear on the Cherokee County GOP website and will be shared on social media. The interview will be shown unedited in its entirety. For the interview, we will ask you a number of questions but can offer no prompting. There are no right or wrong answers, only your answers. And we ask each candidate the same questions. If this is all right with you, I'll have everyone introduce themselves, and then I'll ask John to begin asking the questions.
Sounds good.
John, long, short.
Harry Abrams.
Good to meet you all.
The state budget is essentially a line item proposal. Why is it not noted on each line item what the corresponding obligated expenditure is for?
And you're saying that information isn't available, that it's not listed, the expense information isn't listed? I've been out on the governor's website and I've looked through all the line item expense detail. Yeah, read the question again,
Okay.
That doesn't make
the
sense to me.
The state budget is essentially a line item proposal. Why is it not noted on each line item what the corresponding obligated expenditure is for?
So I disagree with the premise of that question. I've been through the governor's website, I've read through the budget, I've read the line items. I think there is a description as to what is being spent. Now, what I'd like to see, and Ohio does, is better transparency for expenditures. Talking line item level, talk receipt level. You ought to be able to see that last time they went to Vegas for a convention and what they ate for dinner and how much it cost. It's our money. And Ohio's done that very effectively with tools that make that available to citizens to be able to browse themselves. And again, at the receipt level. So there's really, I think it's a benefit for everyone, right? Think of from a government perspective. If you have a government employee who's trying to live the rules and do everything honestly, and they're accused of something, wouldn't it be nice for them to have that kind of transparency to show, nope, everything was up and up, there's no mystery, no question. So it really benefits everybody. So I'd like to see us invest in those sort of tools. They're not expensive. We just have chosen not to do it. So while some of that information may exist today in the governor's budget, we can definitely take a page from some other states that have done that better.
What is the role of a state senator?
I believe a state senator is to provide leadership at a legislative level for the budget, first and foremost constitutionally, to ensure that we pass a budget, but then conservatively, as a senator, I would make sure that we're spending less than we take in and not adding to it each and every time. That's why we're so upset with politicians. That's why I'm running, is because they seem to think their obligation is not just to pass a budget, but to make sure it was substantially bigger than the last budget they passed. So I've signed the no tax pledge. I'm the only candidate in this race to do that. I believe that over the last few years, as we've added $1 billion in spending each and every year to our spending, that wasn't necessary. It wasn't needed to fulfill the essential roles of government. We just did it because it was easy. The money came in and it was there to spend, and we spent it. We can hold the line at current spending levels and repurpose existing money to invest in transportation projects that make sense, infrastructure that makes sense, and not have to continue to raise taxes. And as we take in surpluses, when the economy does well, we ought to have provisions in place that return that money to the taxpayers. It's okay to have a rainy day fund, but it's not okay for government to just consume everything that it takes in. So I think that's the role of the senator. If again you think about that constitutional role of passing a budget, and for a conservative senator to go the extra mile and make sure that budget doesn't take over the whole state.
And why do you want to be a state senator?
So I'm running specifically because I'm one of those disgruntled individuals that was mad at the TV and decided to not be mad at the TV and go out on the campaign trail instead. We've been deceived by establishment politicians who promised us on their mother's grave that they would be conservatives, and that if they just got elected to that state office or that federal office, that they would rein in government spending, that they would rein in the deficit. Even our own state senator, Brandon Beach, who I'm running against, promised us on his website to be for smaller government, less tax. What did he do as soon as he got into government? Last year, he was the only Cherokee vote at the Senate level. The other senators voted against him for the largest tax increase we've seen in decades, the $1 billion gas tax. That was in a year when we had a state surplus. We didn't need that tax. We could have funded the exact same projects with our state surplus. And like I say, the other Cherokee senators voted no, Bruce Thompson and John Albers. But our state senator voted yes, and he was the deciding vote to make that happen and push that tax through. There are other bills like that, from the $8 billion MARTA bill to the $6 billion T-SPLOST to others, that just demonstrate politicians' lobbyist-induced amnesia once they get elected to forget those promises they've made on the campaign trail. In contrast, the only guarantee I can offer to voters is I'm not in this for the money. I don't have any lobbyist money. I don't have any PAC money, in contrast to my opponent, who 99% of his donors, and if I'm off a little bit, it's not by much, are PACs, lobbyists, and special interests. I believe he's had one, maybe more than one individual that wasn't a PAC, special interest, or lobbyist donating to his campaign over the last few quarters. I have none of that. I've got small individual contributors. I'm paying for this race myself, and the job pays $17,000 a year. So this is not a good deal from an economic perspective. I'm doing it because I'm upset, and somebody needs to stand up and take back our district for conservatives.
What constitutes a bad Georgia Senate bill?
Two things come to mind for me because we talk about it a lot on the trail. So one is when the economics don't make sense. The other is when the social and cultural impact doesn't make sense. So a great example of that is this $8 billion MARTA bill. Senate Bill 330, which was sponsored by Brandon Beach, was one of those bills. I read every line of the bill. I come from the private sector. I'm used to dealing with contracts. I'm used to doing deals. I know what a good contract looks like and a bad contract. This was a contract, you could call it, a bill, with no safety valve on it at all. It was a blank check for MARTA. There were no restrictions on how the money got used, when it got used. The project list could change at any time. The tax lasted 47 years, took 20 years to build. And with no accountability, we might as well write a check for $8 billion to the citizens of Cherokee to stay home so they don't have to commute and they don't need any mass transit. It would be a lot cheaper than a bill like this. So from an economic perspective, it didn't make sense. MARTA itself had promised us when they did the extension in 2011 to the North Springs station that they would have 33,000 riders by 2005 after they built this in 2001, 2002. Guess how many they have today? 8. Today, right? I mean, 10 years past the date that they were supposed to have 33,000, they have 8 today. They can't even make the economics work for the existing stations. And there's all kinds of great reasons why that's the case. But when the math doesn't even make sense, why are we putting forward bills like that? I'm a pragmatist when it comes to transit. I am going to invest in transportation, but it's going to be in Cherokee County. It's going to be widening lanes in our major thoroughfares like East Cherokee and Hickory Flat Highway and Canton Road, Highway 20, everywhere that we need it, where we have developments of multi-thousand homes going up on East Cherokee and on Hickory Flat Highway, and no road expansion, none. So why are we doing that? And why are we debating sending all this money down to Atlanta for something that people aren't even writing, that has no controls on it? From a business perspective, my board of directors would fire me if I tried to present a contract, or a bill in this case, that was so full of holes. It would never have even got to the board meeting. And yet somehow we let government and politicians get away with putting that forward, and it almost passed. This $8 billion in MARTA. So from that side, it's got to make mathematical sense. Now, from the emotional and qualitative side, it's got to make sense for the community. When we bring in things, and I'm using mass transit as an example, but this would apply to anything, we have to talk about how does that impact the lives of everyday Georgians and everyday people in Cherokee. So if we bring in this case, a MARTA stop, do you want that? Where will that be? What will that do to the area? Does that mean there's high-density, low-income housing next to those stops? What do the police say will be the increase in traffic and crime as a result of that, as has occurred in other cities? So we need to be putting both of those together. And so for me as a senator, to make sure we're doing good bills, we have to clearly address both those issues. Does it make dollars and cents? And can I prove it to us that we will all get a return on our investment economically? And does it make social, cultural, neighborhood sense for what we want the area to look like? I'm going to make sure that we have Cherokee speaking up and Cherokee bought in to anything we do. Again, I have no lobbyist money. This is the only thing I'm going to focus on, and I could really care less what the lobbyists and special interests and builders have to say on this. I care what Cherokee wants to have happen, and I'll work hard to do that with the other members of the delegation in Cherokee.
While social issues take up a lot of energy, what are the issues taking up the largest budget focus?
Well, the entitlements, right, are the biggest social welfare spending. We spend $3 billion a year in Medicaid at the state level. another 5 to 6 billion from federal dollars just on Medicaid. If you add to that all the other welfare spending, it's billions more. So what I've been working on specifically as a private citizen, and frankly, I'll do this whether I get elected or not, because I just think it's a great idea. Conservatives have the solution to entitlement reform and to poverty and to welfare to work. We do. We just have to find more tangible grassroots ways to make it happen. So I'm working with not-for-profit organizations that are very good at taking in young adults. I'll use one example. They take in groups ages 18 to 24 who are, their parents are living under bridges or on drugs. Terrible situations, but they want out. They want out of poverty. And they come in, and it's a boot camp. It's like a college, a boot camp. They bring them in-house. They teach them IT, sales, admin, HR, train them up. They mentor them. They teach them how to walk, how to talk, how to dress, because you need those skills in the white-collar workplace, right? And after all of that, they get them an internship with a Fortune 500 company. At the end of 12 months with this particular not-for-profit, 90+% success rate, these folks come out making $37,000 a year on average, which is for them is life-changing. Now think about what we can do at the state level and how this ties to entitlements and social spending and where all our money is going. We're paying people to stay home and not work. We want to do that. So if we can repurpose some of that spending into employer tax credits for employers who choose to participate in what we will call accredited not-for-profit programs, like the one I just described, it's a win-win. We get people off the welfare rolls while we get them employed and being self-sufficient. Their families are better and stronger and happier. We're all better, stronger, and happier as a state, both economically and socially. And it's a huge win for conservatives to show that opportunity, not dependency, is the answer, and that opportunity and not a life spent in government assistance is a better path. It's a more exciting path for everyone.
Do you agree with term limits?
I do. Now, the idea to me would be that every citizen should think of an opportunity where they can serve in public service, and I think we actually have a worse problem on the campaign side of things. It is hard to campaign. And it's hard to attract everyday citizens to want to run. So while term limits would be great, and I definitely support those, and I'd be in favor of it, I have no desire to make this a career in politics. I think we also need to talk about what it takes to reform how we run campaigns, to make them easier, perhaps make the cycle shorter. When you think of, and I think you'll see in this race, a lot of lobbyists, special interests, and independent expenditure money hitting me. I'm a poor little guy from the private sector who's never done anything, and as soon as I try to raise my hand to run, they start throwing out all kinds of fake ads and fake money and all kinds of fake attacks. Do you think that is a chilling effect on the rest of our citizens who think about that they might like to run? Whenever you get somebody breathing down your neck that's a lobbyist and saying, you know, all these terrible things about you that were never true, boy, that's a terrible thing for democracy. So we need to address that as well. And that may or may not be a legislative thing. That may also involve work from the parties and cooperative efforts in how we run elections and how we source candidates. And a greater effort on recruiting new candidates. I don't think we do enough to recruit folks from the private sector. I think we rely too much on just organic interest of people raising their hand and saying, I want to do this. I'd like to see us, specifically as a Republican Party, be more aggressive, and I'm not saying there aren't lots of people doing lots of great things to recruit, but I think we can always do more to be more effective in reaching out to good conservatives and letting them know, hey, there is a path, and while it's not easy, it's doable, and here's what that looks like, and remove some of the mystery so that we're bringing in a quality pipeline of talent in addition to term limits. I think you have to have both.
Should Georgia House and Senate representatives be beholden to non-disclosure statements that pay out a settlement for misconduct while the legislative session or the legislature is in session?
Okay, read that one more time.
Should Georgia House and Senate representatives be beholden to non-disclosure statements that pay out a settlement for misconduct while the legislature is in session?
I am not a politician. I have no idea what that's about.
The legislature is noted for rushing bills to the floor each year. It is also noted for changing bill content prior to last-minute voting. Similarly, local officials are known for submitting proposed requests for legislative changes at the last minute during the legislative session. Your comment.
Sure. So you can't cram things down people's throat. Nancy Pelosi was famous during the Obamacare debates of even telling her own members, her own caucus members, that they had to vote for Obamacare before they knew what was in it, right? You have to pass it to find out what's in it. And that became the rallying cry for this problem of trying to change things at the last minute and force people to just go ahead and do it. So, you know, again, as a private citizen, I would be opposed to that. I want to make sure that we have the appropriate wait period in place so that as new legislation, or changes to legislation rather, introduced, that members have the appropriate time to review, comment, reflect, ask questions. Ramming down major changes down anybody's throat does a disservice to everyone. Now, minor changes I'm not going to worry about, but I will definitely fight to make sure that our rules reflect that philosophy, that folks have the appropriate time to digest any major changes and take action accordingly.
There are many subgroups whose financials are hidden and no breakdown is noted. For example, Marble Hill, Brasstown Valley, Spa, and GoFish. Would you consider it a priority to get full disclosure on these items and others?
So for any spending items, now read those ones in particular. What are those items that they're concerned about?
Marble Hill, Brasstown Valley, Spa, and GoFish.
Yeah, so those are entities that I'm not familiar with. But look, I'm always going to be a fan of transparency. This is what I have to do in business every day, right? You have to know what product you're selling to whom, at what price, how's it going, why isn't it working, you know, how are we losing, how are we winning? I mean, you need information and transparency to run a business successfully. You need the same thing for the government. So whether it's providing transparency to taxpayers so they know what we're up to, or transparency for ourselves so that we can do the analysis necessary to figure out what recommendations we should be making in the form of new legislation. We need that. I'm going to be for it. Transparency is almost always a benefit. I can't think of an instance where it wouldn't be in this case, and so I'm always going to be supportive of that.
Are you supportive of widening Georgia Highway 140?
Yes. Yes, I think I answered that earlier. So there'd be a number of roads throughout the area. I think I didn't mention Bell's Ferry for that, like that bridge. I don't even think school buses can get across it. So we have had either if it's a lack of planning or just lack of action, a desire to build homes and to build shopping areas, but no roads. And I don't understand that, and we're going to fix that. And we will take that on, and I know we'll work together with the county commissioners to help make that happen. There's a priority list, and I've been through them on both the Georgia Department of Transportation website as well as the county's wish list and other entities that have their wish list of projects. And I've been through them, and there are gems in there that we can and need to get going on. And going back to the funding point, we got the money. We have the money to do this. We just keep blowing it on other things. Every time we take in a new billion of revenue, so to speak, it shouldn't be called that. You know, it should be called the taxes that it is, but we call it revenue. We shouldn't be spending that on discretionary things. We should be investing in infrastructure or returning it back to the people.
Would you vote on a bill you haven't personally read?
So it depends on the bill. If it's a bill that says what time of day we're going to adjourn, then I won't worry about it, because there are bills like that, and there are measures like that are very nominal in their impact and aren't super big impact. If it's a big deal, I'm not going to know, for sure not. Absolutely not. I'm going to make sure I've read it.
Would you note your personal involvement with the content of a bill you submit prior to submission?
Absolutely, and I've tried to do that even in my not-for-profit work. So I've shared on my website that I'm dedicated to this idea of conservatives having the solution to welfare reform, right? And to really changing this 40-year prison that we've created for people in the welfare state. Well, in the course of doing that, I'm working with a lot of not-for-profits, so I've been careful to disclose, you know, my website and in my other campaign discussions who I'm working with, so people know, hey, I'm giving money to these folks, I'm giving my time to these folks, I care about them while we're doing this. I'm going to continue to do that on any particular bill. Again, my personal incentive here is to be a public servant. This is all downside for me. I'm stepping out of a comfortable, retired situation to serve this area. I'm not a lobbyist. I'm not seeking to be lieutenant governor like my opponent is. I just want to serve as state senator and be a conservative one.
Do you believe that states have the right to nullify unconstitutional federal laws?
So this is a long history of Supreme Court rulings. A good friend of mine is Mike Lee's a U.S. Senator. His father, Rex Lee, was Solicitor General under Ronald Reagan. And I just mention that because it's a topic that's a passion and a love of mine. And sometimes I wish that were the case, that it could be the case, and sometimes I wish that it weren't. The Supreme Court, and we decided to accept the Supreme Court's ruling, has decided they're the ones who get to decide. when that's the case. They're the final arbiter of that law, right? South Carolina obviously tried that a couple of different times, and it didn't work out very well. So while there is a provision for that, the Supreme Court has preempted themselves as being the final court of jurisdiction in making that happen.
Over the past few years, some of our elected representatives have passed laws that promote replacing conventional fossil fuels with alternative green energy sources. As a state legislator, would you have the prerequisite scientific and engineering knowledge to consider voting for these types of laws?
Good. That was a very, like, do you know everything and so you could do everything? Absolutely, of course. So I know enough to bring in people who are smarter than me on topics that I'm not smart enough on. And while it's not a science and technology question, I'll give you an example. The Heritage Foundation are friends of mine, a national conservative think tank, for those who don't know, and they helped me. They helped me on these religious freedom bills while as a private citizen I was trying to help the Senate defend them against the attacks of the Chamber of Commerce. Why did I bring them in? Because they're working in all 50 states. So they see a lot of things that we should learn from and take advantage of. So I'm doing the same thing on the science and technology front. I'm going to bring in folks who will help me. But I also feel like I've got a good enough background in some of these subjects too that I can get the ball forward pretty far before we need to bring in tons of extra folks. But I'm open to all of that, and I won't just rely on my own knowledge to make it happen.
Do you believe that it's better for the government to mandate the conversion to alternate energy sources or to allow alternate energy to compete in a free market environment without government mandates or subsidies?
Right. So 99.9% of the time I'm going to say government shouldn't have a role in doing any of those sort of things. Government shouldn't be picking winners and losers. They just should not. Now, the caveat to that is when it comes to emissions, I do think there's an argument to be made for, we all have emissions on our cars today, right? We could have them unfiltered. Lawnmowers are unfiltered. So there is a role that government plays, but it's a fine line of, are you protecting public health versus are you trying to bet on a particular technology and just make it happen because you just want it to? There is a religion around new energy, right? And that religion is, I just want this because I want it. And it doesn't matter if the economics don't make sense, and it doesn't matter if the social I just really want it, right? So I'm never always going to oppose that sort of thinking. But I do agree that we do have some standards in place that are good for public health, and we do need to consider those. But I wouldn't incentivize and give tax credits to specially preferentially help fuel cells, for instance, over electronic cars.
13 American states do not tax military retirement. With military retirees finding it increasingly difficult to acquire medical assistance efficiently and in a timely manner, most are using their fixed retirement to pay service-related medical procedures, etc., and spending less locally on goods and services. Would you introduce legislation to exempt military retirement pay?
Sure. Yeah, I don't have a problem with that. For me, the military folks are, I mean, they're the front of our civilization. And we need to do everything we can to help them and make sure that they're taken care of. I do want to make sure, and unfortunately this isn't so much a state opportunity as a federal one, I do want to make sure that we are dedicating our military spending to defense and not administration. Again, it's easy to spend money on desk jobs, but we want to make sure we're spending money on frontline folks and people who are equipped to protect us.
Are federal gun control laws constitutional?
Are federal gun control laws constitutional? Well, again, I'm going to have to defer to the Supreme Court on this because I have read their most recent rulings on the Second Amendment, and they've been clear that states have overstepped their bounds in recent years on restricting guns, right? There were cities that we can all name that outright banned them more or less, so you couldn't even have a gun, and those laws got overturned by the Supreme Court, and they have been validating the Second Amendment and our right to bear arms. I think a more important point here is, do we have a strategic plan to ensure that our society is safe? So if we're going to live in a free society, that means you need to have people who are knowledgeable and equipped in protecting themselves, and that's going to include firearms. If we're going to be Sweden and rely on the police to do everything for us, that's a very different state, and it involves giving up a lot of freedoms. It involves giving up a lot of economic support. I don't favor that model. I favor a model where we are self-reliant, we're taking care of ourselves, and everyone can defend themselves.
What does the 10th Amendment mean to you?
Well, it means that states can't be bullied like the federal government would often like to bully them. I, like many conservatives, am concerned that the federal government has assumed a role where they think they really can do anything. and it's the empire of the United States, not the United States of America. And the 10th Amendment is good in reminding us all that any and all protections or rights not granted expressly by the Constitution are reserved to the states and to the people. And we need to talk about that a lot more often, because we pass things at the federal level and we just kind of forget about that because it's convenient. And sometimes it'll be something that we favor. Oftentimes it's something we don't favor. But we need to remember that 10th Amendment's there. While it can be inconvenient to have to do things at the 50 state level, that's a protection. And it's there to protect us from the tyranny of a federal government.
Do you believe that the 17th Amendment is a good thing or a bad thing, and why?
Aha, okay, great. Well, there's a whole litany of amendments that I know people are trying to overturn, everything from the income tax to senators being elected directly and indirectly. So, as far as things like the income tax go, because I know that one gets brought up a lot, I'm definitely not a fan of there being an income tax. I love the idea of a consumption tax because I want it to encourage people to save and not to spend. And I'd love to find ways to encourage us all. Some other countries are better at this, at being more aggressive savers than we are spenders. And we don't talk about the consumer spending so much. We talk about productivity. So I think the income tax contributes to us being a consumerism society where we're spending a lot. I'd like to see a consumption tax. Now, we need to be careful in how we do that so that we ensure we're not too regressive and that we create the right sort of system where we're taking care of folks who really, truly do need the help and not creating a very regressive system. At the same time, you bring up other issues like voting directly on senators, that sort of thing. I don't have a strong opinion on that. Once upon a time, Senate seats were bought and sold by state legislatures. So there can be corruption in all kinds of environments, be it the old one or the new one.
Are there any conditions under which you would advocate either raising existing taxes or implementing new taxes?
No. I'm the only one in this campaign to have signed the pledge with Americans for Tax Reform, as Grover Norquist's group, to not increase taxes. Now, that said, Grover himself says, look, if you're reforming the tax code, that's different. But as long as the net receipts to government don't change, that counts as not raising taxes. So you could use this argument that we were just talking about. What if Georgia got rid of its income tax, but replaced it with a consumption tax? Well, if the net receipts to government are the same, that's not a tax increase. You're changing one type of tax to another type. And Grover Norquist's group would approve, or at least I'm told, secondhand would approve with that sort of view. So I'm fine with reforming the tax code, but it can't result in net increases to the government, which to me is a tax increase.
Are you currently a member of the Cherokee County Republican Party?
I don't believe so because I live in Fulton County. I'm in the Milton County, and so I am a circle, can't remember what they call it, but I'm a kind of mid-level member in the Fulton County Republican Party. I live in Milton, just on the other side of the line of Cherokee.
Okay.
Yeah.
We would like our elected Republican leaders to help us grow the party. Please briefly describe any significant efforts you have made in the past to support the Republican Party and/or Republican candidates locally, statewide, or nationally.
Sure, that I've always tried to do. I'm a fan of supporting other people to do this so that I don't have to do it. This is one of those rare exceptions where I felt like I had to do it myself. But I've given, and it's on public disclosures, money to a number of political leaders in the state who I feel like are true conservatives who are fighting the good fight and trying to make conservative things happen. I've also given money to the state party for Georgia. And then I've always tried to involve friends, family, community members in policy issues and get them involved and try to get other people who are interested to run for office. I think, again, recruiting, like we talked about earlier, is a big gap. And the more we can recruit everyday average citizens to come away from their day job and take a stint in public service, it's a win for all of us. One of the worst things we've done in our society is create career politicians. It does nobody any good, even the good ones. It's okay. It's just time for somebody else to be there, and it's good to have new blood come in.
Have you ever been arrested or convicted of a crime excluding traffic offenses?
Never. And no traffic offenses either. Yeah.
Have you ever been the subject of professional discipline or cited for breach of ethics or unprofessional conduct by any disciplinary committee, court, administrative agency, or other professional group?
None. Nothing.
Thank you very much for your time. If you'd like to say
Okay.
anything else to the people watching the
Great. Just that I'm not a politician. I'm just a concerned citizen who's running to take our district back for conservatives. I've been concerned, like we all have, that we elected leaders at the state and national level who promised us smaller government. They promised to rein in spending. And every time they run for office, they repeat it. But when they're in office, they do the exact opposite. And again, our current state senator, Brandon Beach, has done just that. On his website, he promised us that he would shrink the size of government, that he wouldn't increase spending. And then what were his bills? The $1 billion tax increase, that was all on him. The other senators in Cherokee did not vote for that. He made it happen. $8 billion for MARTA, if that's not a tax, I don't know what is. And the $6 to $8 billion for T-SPLOS, which 80% of us voted down. I don't remember the last time we agreed on anything, 80% of the time. So again, I'm not a politician, I'm just a concerned citizen. I'm doing this out of my own pocket. I don't have any lobbyists, I don't have any special interests, I don't have any PACs supporting me. But my opponent has hundreds of thousands of dollars and almost no individual contributors. So I'm just trying to take my turn in public service to serve our interests as a true conservative. I'm the only one in this race who has signed the pledge with Grover Norquist's group, the Americans for Tax Reform, to not increase taxes. I'm also the only candidate to have been endorsed by both pro-life organizations in Georgia. In fact, my opponent lost his endorsement with one of those organizations some time back. I'm the only candidate in this race that has extensive private sector experience and knows how to get things done in a way that makes economic sense and social conservative sense. I'm not a lifelong bureaucrat, and I'm not a lifelong person who has earned his living off of people related to the government. I've had to earn my own living and earn my own way, and I hope to earn your vote. I hope you'll vote Aaron Barlow May 24th. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Aaron.